The PSVR2 is right around the corner, set to release on February 22nd at $550 US. There are about 30 new games set to release at launch, including a port of Resident Evil Village and Gran Turismo 7, alongside VR-only experiences such as Horizon Call of the Mountain. In this video, I will be going over the reasons for why the PSVR2 has amazing potential and can help the VR industry as a whole take that next step. First, however, let's talk a little bit about the current leading headset in the VR space, the Quest 2. With its wireless functionality and affordable price, the Quest 2 was the device to finally make VR mainstream, selling over 14.8 million units as of June 2022, which at the time was actually higher than the newly released Xbox consoles. The thing is, the Quest 2 is not primarily a gaming VR headset, and instead has its main focus on, you guessed it, the metaverse. I could go on and on about how this whole focus on the metaverse is a terrible idea and how the average white-collar worker is not going to put on a big-ass headset to attend virtual meetings in a PS2 tier graphic environment. But that's for another video. The problem I believe with the biggest VR headset not focusing on gaming is that more and more developers try to release their games on the Quest 2 in order to get more sales. As a result of this, by releasing their games on weaker hardware, they are essentially compromising and reducing the scale of their games due to the Quest 2's technical capabilities. It's hard to innovate when technology stagnates. This is why as of late there has been a lull in VR game development and why there hasn't been much of a technological improvement that we all thought there would be 5 or so years ago. Now please don't get the wrong idea and think that I am insulting the games that are on the Quest 2. There are of course many excellent games on the system that have unique ideas and gameplay. But to achieve the type of blockbuster AAA VR game that we all know is possible with this technology is just hard to do when you are developing around weaker hardware. This is why I think the PSVR2 is important, as it can give developers a little push to continue making bigger and more extensive VR games like they were before. The better the PSVR2 sells and the more customers it gains, the more attractive it becomes to developers. I understand that there are probably a couple people watching this video thinking that I am giving Sony too much credit while there are other companies like Valve who have been making much bigger contributions to the VR space. While I agree that Valve makes quality headsets and that Half-Life Alyx is, to this day, the best VR game ever, to make a change in the industry, you still need a high output of games. Not only to attract customers, but like I said, to make other developers in the space push the boundaries of their games. Despite Half-Life Alyx setting a new level for VR games, it really didn't truly change the VR scene, as no other developers really aimed to reach the bar it set. This is where I think Sony has the advantage. With a war chest of amazing developers such as Insomniac, Sucker Punch, Naughty Dog, Santa Monica, and many more, they can help create a new standard by releasing a ton of next-gen high-quality AAA games, and not just one or two anomalies, like Half-Life Alyx unfortunately is, even almost 3 years after its release. Of course, the golden question is, would Sony actually put these developers to use with the PSVR2? I'm well aware that I have been sucking Sony and the PSVR2 off so far in this video, but you can throw everything I said in the garbage if Sony is unable to provide the system proper first-party titles and third-party support. We all know Sony's history with their secondary peripherals such as the PS Move and the PS Vita. These devices failed not because of their hardware, but their lack of software. Fortunately, so far the PSVR2 doesn't look like it will struggle with the same problems as of now. I know there are a lot of people calling its launch lineup weak, but I don't really see how. There is first-party support with Horizon Call of the Mountain, a Horizon spin-off game by Firesprite and Guerrilla, and a VR mode of Gran Turismo 7, which was also recently announced at CES earlier this month. There is also notable third-party support with Resident Evil Village, set to have a VR patch available at launch, which is honestly huge as Resident Evil 7 was one of the highlights of the original PSVR. Now, based on rumors that have been circulating around the system since it was revealed, Sony does seem to have an emphasis on hybrid games, like the aforementioned Resident Evil Village and Gran Turismo 7, as opposed to full-on VR games built from the ground up. Since PlayStation tends to release third-person action-adventure games like God of War, The Last of Us, and Uncharted, I assume that these potential hybrid games will play more like Hellblade VR, which based on a lot of people's opinions is a great VR port. If Sony were to add VR support with all or most of their single-player games, especially those that are based on already established IP, I can easily see the PSVR2 taking off. However, it is important to point out that there are a few negatives with this approach as well. First of all, despite hybrid games like Resident Evil and Gran Turismo being great, they are still ultimately designed to be 2D games. I imagine that it would be difficult to incorporate gameplay elements that are only possible in VR games without straying too far from the original 2D format, particularly for games with a third-person viewpoint. Just a side note, but this is why I hate that Microsoft gave up on their plans for VR, especially with all the RPG studios they have been acquiring like Obsidian and Bethesda. Western RPG games are literally tailor-made to be ported into VR, like Skyrim and Fallout, which are both great. I have my fingers crossed that Starfield will eventually be ported as well, but it's not looking very likely. Back to PlayStation. I believe that it is essential for them to keep on making original VR games that use core VR gameplay elements, as I assume that later on in this generation, the novelty of hybrid third-person games might start to wear off, as at the end of the day, they are still only ports. I believe that spin-offs of their most popular first-party IP, like what they are doing with Call of the Mountain, is the best way to attract new people into the VR space. Just imagine a Ghost of Tsushima VR game. Remember the title sequence where Jin is racing through the trees into a field on his horse? Now imagine that in VR, where you can reach down while riding your horse and feel the haptic feedback of the flowers brushing against your fingers. Imagine semi-realistic combat where you can strike enemies down with a single slice of your sword, but they can do the same to you if you're not careful enough. Imagine the stealth sections, where you have to crawl through tall grass and assassinate enemies one by one. I'm getting away with myself now, but you get the idea. Another IP that is a no-brainer for me is Spider-Man. I'm aware that it would be difficult to do because of the motion sickness from all the swinging, but I don't care, figure it out. The idea of playing Spider-Man in VR is simply too good to pass up. Swinging through New York and shooting webs out of your hands to defeat bad guys would be amazing. A good Spider-Man VR game can honestly single-handedly carry the PSVR2 throughout the entire generation, if done well. At the end of the day, unlike what Meta is doing, I believe that Sony has to focus on VR gaming rather than social experiences for the system to grow. However, this doesn't mean that it must completely disregard these social aspects. Something like PlayStation Home, like on the PS3, would be perfect for VR and would essentially be their version of the metaverse. A port of Dreams with multiplayer would also be something along these lines. PlayStation's secondary devices like the PSP were relatively successful, but they were never able to really stand at the top of their market. Tell the average person to think of a handheld gaming device, and they would immediately think of the DS or the Game Boy, not the PSP. As of now, you tell a person to think of a VR headset, they would most likely say the Quest 2. But if Sony is willing to put in the money and effort, there's nothing stopping the PSVR2 from becoming the de facto VR headset. That's all I have for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Have a good one.